What is going on, everyone? For those of you that don't know me, my name is Benjamin Nowak, and today we're going to be talking about my top 5 baits for fishing around the spawn. This is for the pre-spawn, the spawn, and the post-spawn, and we're not going to talk about any bed fishing baits. I know that's a shocker. A lot of you guys probably like to bed fish, but my least favorite thing to do all season long is looking at them on a bed and try and catch them with some sort of bed fishing bait. So we're going to stay away from that. Now, I'm going to talk about a lot more than 5 baits, and there's going to be a reason for that. Some of these are more smallmouth specific, some of these are more largemouth specific, and we'll kind of dive into that as we get into this breakdown. But we're going to be talking about my top 5 favorite baits that I like to fish around the spawn for both species. Now, the way I'm going to do this, we're going to break it down from the top of the water column down to the bottom. We're really going to go through each and every bait, kind of the setup I'm throwing it on, why I choose it, where I'm throwing it, and how I'm fishing it to get a lot of those bites. Now, one thing I'm doing is I'm going to leave links to most of these products down below, but I'm also going to leave a link to my Amazon store, and there's a reason for this. Now, it does support the channel, so anything you buy through Amazon through these links supports me, but also it gives you guys a very comprehensive view of the tackle that I'm using. So I have it broken down into swim jigs, flipping jigs, topwater baits, tubes, and it gives you the rod, reel, line, baits I use, tube head size that I use, and it really breaks it down so you guys can go in there and get really specific with my gear through the Amazon store. And I think it's a really unique way that you can interact with what I'm doing, and I can share with you guys exactly what I'm doing out there on the water. So with all of that said, let's get into these baits. I know you guys are dying to see what baits I'm throwing. So the first bait we're going to be talking about is obviously a topwater. Now, this bait works best when those fish are first moving up to spawn, kind of getting ready to spawn, all the way through the post spawn. A topwater bait just flat out catches them, and there's going to be 2 different topwater baits I'm talking about. The first one is a walking style bait. Now, this is a Reaction Innovations Vixen. It's in a bone color, which is probably my top favorite topwater bait color. Bone just works everywhere. It imitates bluegill, shad, imitates really just anything scooting across the top, which is what bass are keying in on. Also, those bass in the pre, the spawn, and the post spawn are really territorial, so anything scooting across the top water gets their attention, calls them in, and makes them bite. This bait works whether you're up in the north, you're down in the south fishing around the bluegill spawn, the bass spawn, or the shad spawn. This bait is going to catch them. It's just a really tried and true bait all across the country. Now, like I said, it's a bone vixen. I'm throwing it on a halo rod, 6'6" medium rod. I really like that short rod for this because it can make really accurate presentations around shallow cover. But by putting it on monofilament, I can make long bomb casts and still get a good hook set into those fish. Now, like I said, I'm fishing this on 17-pound monofilament line. I like mono. I prefer mono just because I fish a lot of cleaner water, and I think that mono gets me a couple extra bites, and I think that's a really important thing. I'm fishing it on a BB1 high-speed gear ratio reel. This is a 7:1-to-1 series reel. I like that high-speed gear ratio anytime I'm fishing topwater, because when I set the hook into those fish and they're a long ways away from the boat, I want to be able to crank that handle and get those fish coming to me with a high-speed gear ratio like a 7:1-to-1 BB1. I can make long bomb casts, but get that fish coming to me as quickly as possible. So that is the first topwater that we're going to be talking about. Another really good topwater during kind of that spawn and post-spawn is a frog. Now, the frog I have tied on, this I believe is a Pro Z series frog, but really any 65 size frog, kind of that middle of the road size frog is what I like. This one has a white belly, and that's really what I key in on when I'm choosing a frog color. I look at the belly of the frog. We're not typically seeing the back unless they pull the frog under. So I look for a white belly, a brown belly, a yellow belly, or a black belly. I like the white belly most of the time, a white with a little bit of yellow because it imitates bluegill, imitates, if you have some shad, imitates a bunch of different types of bait fish scooting across the top. And I can fish this in a little bit heavier cover. Like where I'm not able to fish that spook, I can take, or that vixen, I can take and fish the frog and typically get it through that cover without hanging it up. I'm fishing it on 65-pound braid and a BB1 Pro reel, 7:1-to-1 gear ratio. It's another high-speed gear ratio reel. You can make really long casts, but when you hit that fish, you can get them moving towards you really, really quickly. Now, this is a 7:1 3/4 heavy action rod. What this means is it's basically a mag medium heavy rod. I like a little bit softer tip because I like to skip my frogs around that cover, and I can work those frogs out of there, but still have enough hook setting power to get that fish coming to me. So I like a rod with a little bit more tip to it. That's why I choose that mag medium heavy style. So that's my frogging setup. Fishing at similar places that I'm fishing that vixen, around shallow cover, around grass, around laydowns, around wood, around docks is a really good place to throw this as well, and it just flat out gets bit. So those are my top water baits, a vixen and a frog, and those will catch them across the country around the spawn. The next bait I'm going to be talking to you guys about is a smallmouth and largemouth slayer, no matter where you guys live, and that is a jerkbait. Now, this is a shallower diving jerkbait. This is a 6 Sense Provoke 106X. That's a more moderate diving jerkbait down to about 4 foot deep. And I really like that moderate depth because I can fish it around shallow cover, I can fish it around grass, I can fish it around wood, and be really precise with this bait. And it draws a lot of big bites. It looks just like a little shiner, looks just like a little bluegill, looks just like a bunch of different bait fish in the water, and it draws a lot of big bites. So a jerkbait is a great way to cover water slowly when you know bass are spawning in an area, when you know they should be in an area keying on those bait fish. Throw a jerkbait, you'll draw some big bites. A couple years ago on one of the southern reservoirs, I believe it was John Murray, was throwing a bigger jerkbait to catch those bass right around the spawn, and those fish were pre-spawning and post-spawn, and he drew out a lot of big fish with the jerkbait. So it works even down south. This is a great bait to catch them when those bass get a little bit finicky and you don't want to pick up something like a stickworm. You can catch them on a jerkbait typically. Now I'm throwing it on a little bit longer rod. This is an Arc Invoker 7-1 medium extra fast rod. I like the 7-1. I can make longer casts, still be precise with it, and what I really like is that extra fast tip. It gives me a lot of snap with this jerkbait, so it allows this jerkbait to really dart and snap and really twitch hard. A lot of people throw it on a softer rod. I like that little bit snappier rod, the rod with a little bit more tip to it, to kind of give me that really hard twitch, especially when those fish are really, really aggressive. I like that. Throwing that on a Lew's LFS Series Speed Spool, 10-pound fluorocarbon is my go-to for this setup. So those are kind of my more top of the water column baits. The next bait I'm going to be talking about is some sort of mid-column reaction bait, and this is a medium to shallow diving crankbait. Now this here is specifically a grass crankbait. This is a 6 Sense Lures Movement 80X, and it's really designed for fishing around shallow cover, around shallow grass, and it draws a lot of big bites. Really, this dives about 3 to 5 foot deep, and I like this bait because I can fish it around that shallow wood, the shallow grass really easily. But anything up to like a 10-foot diver I'll throw during this time of year. These fish start to move into that shallow cover after they're done spawning, whether that's for largemouth, really shallow, or smallmouth, about 10 foot deep. And I like to throw something that I can cover water with and draw a lot of bites with. A crankbait is a great way to do that. This is, again, as I said, that 6 Sense Movement 80X draws a lot of big bites around shallow cover and just triggers those really big ones to bite. Typically, if you're going to catch a giant, I like to do it on a bait like a crankbait. It just draws a lot of big bites. I think it's the profile. Looks just like the forage I'm imitating. This is a bluegill color, and it just triggers those big fish to bite. I'm throwing it on an Arc Crankbait Series rod. It's a 7'4", medium heavy, moderate rod. So what that means, it's a medium heavy rod, but because it's moderate, it bends way down the rod. That helps me keep these fish pinned on these treble hooks, especially when I'm making a really long cast for these fish. So I really like that medium heavy with the moderate action. I'm throwing it on a Lew's BB1 reel with 15-pound fluorocarbon. 15-pound fluorocarbon is the deal, especially when you're fishing around shallow cover. You need something that's going to be abrasion resistant, and that 15-pound test helps me fish it around that shallow cover with confidence and not worry about breaking those fish off. So I don't typically go less than 15 foot, especially when I'm fishing around grass or shallow wood, because I don't want to have the risk of breaking those fish off. I'm fishing on a 7 1-to-1 reel. It's a higher speed gear ratio reel. You can fish it really with like a 6'4" to like a 7'1". You want something in that medium gear ratio, and you can just kind of keep that bait moving and get a lot of reaction strikes that way. So that is my crankbait setup. Another good medium diving kind of reaction bait retrieve that works really well around grass is a chatterbait. A chatterbait just draws a lot of really big bites. Again, it's a movement bait that has a little bit more bulk to it. Looks just like what those bass are eating if they're feeding on shad. You can make it look like a shad, a bluegill, a perch, whatever it is. You can make a chatterbait, a vibrating jig, look just like that presentation or that forage type, and it draws a lot of big strikes. So shallow diving crankbait, a chatterbait, a vibrating jig, 3/8 ounce is going to catch them. So that is kind of that mid-column retrieve. Now we're going to start moving to that bottom presentation, and this is something I've had a lot of fun with this year. It's something that's caught a ton of big fish for me here in the pre-spawn, and we're going to start with a couple different variations of this bait. The first one, and one that I've fished a ton, probably caught me over 100 fish this spring, is a swim jig. This is something I was playing around with, had zero confidence in. I'm saying like zero confidence in before this season. But a swim jig just gets a lot of bites. It's something not a lot of guys throw. They don't typically think of swimming a jig, but it gets a lot of bites around shallow grass. These fish, as soon as they get done spawning, they pull out into that first shallow cover, and typically that's grass. So by fishing a swim jig, you can fish it around that shallow cover really effectively and get a lot of big bites. I've played with a ton of different swim jigs. This is an all-terrain tackle swim jig. This is a 3/8 ounce model. That's what I really like, is that 3/8 ounce. And this is a black and blue. I've thrown some nickel saber jigs. Those are really good. Anything black and blue, black with a little bit of purple. Green pumpkin works really well. But just kind of play around, find a swim jig you like, and that 3/8 ounce is the deal. So the trailer I paired with this is a Rage Craw. I cut it down to fit the body, but it's just a really good all-around profile that has a ton of kick, a ton of action, draws a lot of big bites. We'll talk about swim jig trailers here in just a minute, but the rod I'm throwing it on is a 7'3", medium heavy, moderate, fast rod. Now, the key here is a little bit longer rod, something 7 foot to 7'3", 7'6", but that moderate, fast tip. You need something that's softer. Now, a lot of guys think of a swim jig, they think of heavy braid, they think of heavy grass, they think of heavy cover. The swim jigs I'm throwing have really, really soft weed guards. So basically how I'm fishing it is, with just a steady retrieve, popping the rod, and those fish load up on it. Well, if I don't have that moderate fast tip, when I set the hook, I'm going to pull this jig away from them. I'm basically going to blow their mouth open because they choke it really well, and I'm not going to get a good hook set into them. I need that moderate fast tip. Think of it as like a crankbait or a chatterbait retrieve, but basically without a blade. It's a more subtle approach. You need that softer tip, and that's why that moderate fast rod is really important. Now, I'm not associated with Fitzgerald, but Brian Schmidt is the one that told me all about a swim jig technique, so I got to give him a ton of credit. He makes a swim jig specific rod through Fitzgerald. It's a 7'1", medium heavy, moderate fast tip. Now, if I were going to go out and buy a swim jig rod, just knowing Brian and knowing how much attention to detail he pays, go out and check that rod out. I'm going to leave that link down in the description on the swim jig stuff. Go check that Fitzgerald swim jig rod out. It is the deal. I've seen him use it. I felt it. If I had the opportunity right now, I would go out and get one. But if you have a rod already that's kind of a moderate fast tip, get out there, throw a swim jig around. I promise you're going to catch some fish. The reel speed you want is a medium gear ratio. This is a 6/8 to 1 gear ratio reel with 15-pound test fluorocarbon. You can fish it on braid if you're fishing on really heavy grass, but for the most part I've fished it on fluorocarbon all year, not had an issue. Really haven't lost a ton of fish on a swim jig when they eat it. They tend to choke it, so a swim jig is a really good presentation. Now let's talk about the trailers as I promised. Like I mentioned, that's a Rage chunk that I bit down. There's a bunch of other good trailers. You just need something that has a lot of kick. I've been fishing a lot of craw-style presentations on my swim jigs this year. Kind of playing around with that, something with a lot of kick on it. So let me show you a couple other models I've been playing with, a couple other things that I've liked so far on a swim jig, because I've gotten a ton of questions about kind of like guys not having confidence with the swim jig, guys burying it up into trees. Kind of want to give you guys a little bit more breakdown on this bait. So the two other trailers I've had a ton of success with. This is a Zoom Speed Craw. This is like a super classic swim jig trailer. This is a Bama craw. I fish this when I'm fishing around like crawfish on a lake that has a lot of bass that are feeding on craw, and it gets a lot of bites. These paddle tails kick, or these like cut tails, kick really, really fast, so it's a really aggressive presentation. A very similar bait is the Gambler Lures burner craw, and like that speed craw, it has those cut paddles, and it kicks really hard. This is a little bit softer kick than the speed craw, but gets a lot of bites. This is a really good color. I don't even know if they make it anymore. It's called Killer Gill. It's like a green pumpkin with some black and blue and some purple mixed in. Looks just like a bluegill, so if you guys need something bluegill imitation, this burner craw is a really, really good choice. All of this is going to be linked in the description for you guys to go check out as well, but these are my favorite swim jig trailers, that Rage Craw, or basically the burner craw, or the speed craw. So a bunch of different swim jig trailer options. So that's what I'm throwing. Now we're going to talk about another jig. This is in that same category. I've been fishing a jig a ton, and this is a bait I have a lot of confidence in. For those of you guys that have been here for a little while, you know that I love to fish a jig, especially for largemouth. Well, this is a very finesse presentation, half-ounce flippin' style jig. This is something I've been throwing around docks a lot. I'll also throw it, around that shallow cover if I need to kind of get a big bite. But what I like about this jig, this is a Missile Baits Ike mini flip jig. So it's a small presentation compared to a half-ounce jig, and it gets a lot of big bites. I have this paired with a Berkeley Chigger Craw, the 3-inch size, pairs up really, really nicely with this Ike mini flip jig. Now I'm fishing a jig basically in all the places that have really heavy cover. So whether it's laydowns, whether it's wood, whether it's docks, rocks, I love to fish around docks this time of year. Basically all those really heavy cover presentations is where I'm fishing a jig. Draws a lot of really big bites for both largemouth and smallmouth bass, and this Ike mini flip is the deal. I'm fishing it on a Fitzgerald Skippin' Special, 6'9", heavy, moderate, fast action. Now, again, not sponsored by Fitzgerald, but Brian Thrift is the best skipper that I've ever seen. So going with the Fitzgerald rods, 6'9", Skippin' Special that he designed. It's kind of basically that same deal as that swim jig rod, right? Like, you do what works for the best in the world, and if it works for them, you can make it figure out how to work for you. I'm fishing it on a 7 1-to-1 Lew's BB1 Pro. This is a left-handed model. This is what I do anytime I flip and pitch and skip. I basically, when I make that cast, I want to have my hand always on the reel, ready to go to set the hook, especially when you're flipping docks, flipping heavy cover. When that bait's falling, you'll get a lot of bites. If you don't have your hand on that reel, you might miss some fish because you can't set the hook quickly enough to get those fish moving to you. That high-speed gear ratio is also really important, because when you set the hook, you want to get them moving and coming to you as fast as possible. 20-pound test fluorocarbon line. That way if I get wrapped up in something, I can get them out. Don't have to worry about breaking them off. So a jig is also a great alternative if you're fishing around heavy cover. Still, like I said, there's going to be way more than one bait in each category. Same sort of category. This is more of a smallmouth style presentation, is a tube. Anytime you're fishing around smallmouth, you can't go wrong fishing a tube. This is a green pumpkin style color. That's I believe green pumpkin with watermelon and purple and red flake. It's a great color for those smallmouth that are in a little bit dirtier water. I have it rigged on a 1/4 ounce head, and this is a Lew's 7'2" tube rod with a Lew's custom speed spin reel, 3000 size, 15-pound test braid. I always go braid to fluorocarbon on my spinning setups. Helps reduce line twist and increase the sensitivity. And then 7-pound or 8-pound or 6-pound fluorocarbon, it can be your preference. You can go all the way up to 10, as light as I believe 6. I just don't recommend going below 6. I mean, 6 is really light, so most of the time I'm sticking with 7 or 8-pound tests, especially on my tubes. You want something that you can set the hook, get them moving towards you and away from those shallow rocks, shallow cover, or deep cover as quickly as possible. That's 4. There's one more bait we're going to talk about, and it's a bait that I really don't enjoy throwing. So you have those 4. You have a topwater, a shallow water jerkbait style presentation, shallow water reaction style bait presentation, whether it's a crankbait, a chatterbait, a small swim bait for smallmouth. Then you have a jig, which is like a swim jig, a jig, or a tube. Then you have this one last presentation, and it's something that I don't really enjoy to throw, but it's something that gets bit. It just flat out, like, this is the time of year when if I have to throw a bait to get bit, this is what it's going to be. For largemouth, it is a Gambler Fat Ace. Now, what is a Fat Ace, you might ask? It is the horrific stickworm. Now, the stickworm gets bit everywhere in the country, all across the country, all year long, but this is the time of year I'm throwing it, in the post-spawn. Fish it around shallow cover, where you know bass are living. They're lethargic, they don't really want to move very fast, but if you float this thing in front of their face, they're going to come over and eat it. You know, there's a bunch of different companies that make this bait. Gambler makes a Fat Ace, Gary Yamamoto Senko, Yum Dinger, Berkeley General. You have so many different types of stickworms. Pick your favorite stickworm, go out, throw it around, you're gonna get bit. Basically all around the spawn, but I'll pick it up in the post spawn when those fish get really finicky. Texas rig it, wacky rig it, flip it, pitch it, doesn't matter, you're gonna get bit on a stickworm. Anywhere you got some sort of finicky bass, it's a fluke. It's a fluke style bait. Now, what is a fluke? It is a soft jerk bait. It runs about 2 foot below the water. You have to fish it typically pretty slowly, unless you're fishing it on a weighted, belly weighted swim bait hook. But it gets bit. It's that same deal. It just kind of sits in their face and hangs and hangs and hangs and hangs, and then you twitch it, and it hangs and hangs, and those fish can't resist it, so they come up and smoke it. This is just, to me, like a Senko. Fish around the same areas you fish a Senko. Shallow cover. You know, open water. Somewhere you want to float a bait because you know bass are living. Pick up a fluke. Fish it the same way you fish a Senko. Jerk it, twitch it, flip it, pitch it, cast it around. You're going to get bit on a fluke. So, those are my 5 baits that I'm going to be picking up anytime I'm around the spawn. Pretty much all those baits will never leave the deck of my boat. Whether I'm largemouth fishing, smallmouth fishing, I'm going to have a variation of those 5 baits on the deck of my boat, and that's basically all I'm going to be catching them on. So if you guys have any questions or comments about any of these setups, please let me know. Like I said, I'm going to have my Amazon store linked below. It's going to have links to a bunch of different products that I use, whether it's different crankbaits, different jigs, you know, different jerk baits, topwaters, etc. It's all going to link back to the Amazon store, so you guys can check out a bunch of different baits, more than the ones I just featured in this video. But if you have any questions or comments about techniques, areas, locations, baits, just let me know down in the comment section below. I'm very interactive, so feel free to hit me up. Also, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for joining the No Wait Nation. Feels crazy to say that because I've had this in my mind for a long time. But as always, thank you for watching. Take care. Tight lines. God bless. Pursue fish.